Thank you very much. And thanks massively to Mark and Cindy for giving me the platform. I think the information that I'm giving you tonight should be taught in schools because it's really the epitome of what true healing is all about. So essentially, my name is Brett Simpson. I've got a lotus, which is in the middle there, which you can't see because it's a little bit of a busy slide. So that's essentially my logo. And the reason why that I chose that logo is because the lotus on the top of the water is really beautiful. It's near perfect. It's really gorgeous, but the roots are in the muck and in the darkness. So essentially, what I essentially do is support people going through the tough times in their life in order to be able to essentially integrate the shadow with the light and supporting people going through trauma. So I position myself as a resilience coach. I teach, I facilitate, and I guide people around through and within their belief systems to be able to move into a place where they can start improving their health, improving their well-being, improving their emotional honesty and their spirituality as well. So I just want to start off with, I speak a lot about cancer. So you've come here around a wellness and a health talk, but essentially where all the lessons and everything and all the wisdom comes from is around the cancer space. And a lot of people have really challenged me around this because I've become known as the cancer guy, and am I the wellness guy? I'm the resilience guy. Who am I? I'm essentially all of those. But the power of the lessons around health and wellness being rooted in cancer is very similar to, and I was given a really great analogy by a friend, that the person that we've looked to for the past 30 years around freedom, around equality, is Nelson Mandela. And the reason why we look to him is that he was denied and lost his freedom for 27 years. So in order for us to learn what the value of freedom is, it's to have it taken away. And essentially, I feel the same exactly around the cancer space. To understand the health and the ingredients to health and wellness, what better place to learn than the people who have come from a terminal diagnosis, what was meant to be terminal, and succeeded in healing themselves past that prognosis. So essentially tonight I'm going to be speaking to you around case studies, around the science behind those, and some tools and some people that I've learned a heck of a lot from in all the experimentation that I've done with myself over the last 12 years. So the one thing, and I suppose usually I have a caveat here as well around belief systems, because some of the case studies, the scientific case studies, can stretch a belief system and can challenge a belief system. So I would like to ask you, if there is something that is quite challenging, that it's not that you don't throw everything out with the bathwater. There are a couple of things that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I understand the audience tonight, it might not at all actually be a stretch. So if you could just be aware that a belief system might come up that might be challenged by a couple of things that I might say as well. The other thing is that I don't believe in absolute truths. I believe in subjective relative truths. And this is my relative truth against the experience that I went through and also the science that I've understood and the experimentation that I've done for the past 12 years and the clients that I've worked with in what works, what doesn't work. There is a lot of amazing facts and there's a lot of mystery as well that still sits in the pit of this. The four slides that make up this one slide is essentially four of my anchor talks. So this is a kind of an overarching talk, but it's pretty much made up of the mental, the emotional, and the physical being predominantly nutritional, and then the connection between all of those. So I just want to take you very quickly through each one of those. So the nutritional one is the talk that I'm most anxious about when I give it, because Dr. Google and Dr. Google Nutrition and Dietitian gives very conflicting information around meat and dairy and what to have and what not to have. The content I really go through in the nutritional talk, which I'll obviously touch on today or this evening, is really around some of the scientifically supported guidelines, essentially, that have been agreed to across a number of different experts in different ranges of nutrition and dietetic. But the biggest thing that I've found is that we have such a deep emotional relationship with regard to food, and there's so much projection in our society around should we become, we have to become a vegan or a vegetarian or a pescatarian, but it doesn't take into context where we are currently and where a big move for us is, and again where we have such deep emotional connections to food. I have a chip problem and I have a lasagna problem. And those are my comfort foods and my comfort cheats. Otherwise, I've been shifting my diet. The biggest takeout of that talk is really taking one tiny little change over long periods of time and starting to make a little adjustments soaked in a huge amount of awareness. And that's how I see, and that's how I've experienced as a coach, supporting other people to make changes. The big changes I find are completely unsustainable, and I completely am against them. It's the tiny little changes soaked with awareness that seem to work. The role of the mind in healing. This is essentially a talk that goes around how the mind works. Einstein was famously quoted in saying that we only use 5% of our mind. And what it said that he was meaning by that was that 5% is the conscious mind and the creative mind, and 95% is the subconscious mind, which essentially runs our life and runs the results of our life and our health. And the best analogy I can give is when I was learning clutch control in a car. It took me a number of months to actually get the right pressure between the clutch and the accelerator, but now I haven't thought about it in probably 2 decades. So it's those sorts of overriding programs that our societal influences essentially start accumulating our belief system subconsciously. And it's really to kind of give insight into what you put into your mind essentially starts to become and turn into belief systems over a period of time, and who those are is quite an important and powerful question, and often very disturbing to ask. And again, the biggest caveat that I can speak to with regard to that talk is tiny little changes around awareness around people who influences you in a positive way, negative way. I did an experiment with myself about 3 years ago, because I'm constantly doing these like little 21-day challenges or a shift here and there. And I checked in with myself on how I felt about myself after I'd spent time with a specific person. And what happened in that awareness experiment was that I started to, and not consciously, move away from the people that made me feel less or lack of, and started to move towards people that made me feel full, worthy, and that I have something to contribute. And it was a fascinating experiment. It's really shifted my social circles quite dramatically. And again, it's from just playing with the kind of basically the mental game. The role of the emotions, and this is where such amazing and interesting science is being unhinged now with people like Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton around the biology of belief. This is essentially a lot of the content that I speak into tonight around the placebo effect, epigenetics, psychoneuroimmunology, and how those influence our health, because essentially the pharmacy inside of us gets engineered by what we think and what we feel. The thinking essentially feeds the feeling, which actually does all the genetic magic in our internal pharmacy and results in either moving towards health and homeostasis or disease and situations like autoimmune diseases and cancers and things like that. And then the last talk essentially that I speak into is the connectedness between all of it. So the mind and the body, there's so much science and there's so much amazing data that's being collected around it. And even now, some of the spiritual side of things are being tracked, like Joe Dispenza's advanced programs. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in the brain and the pituitary gland that really show the connection between all three and all parts of ourselves. I'm a specialist in, I suppose the best way to call it is a personality profile called the Enneagram. Has anybody heard of it? Okay. So the Enneagram is essentially, I would say a personality profiling tool, but it's not really fair to say that. It's over 2,500 years old in ancient Greek. It's in ancient Judaism, Christianity, Sufism, ancient science, ancient maths. No one can claim the origins of it. If you speak to the esoterics, it's given to us by the aliens. If you speak to the Christians, it's given to us by God. So it's 9 essential personality types. And when I worked at the Hummingbird Cancer Center, basically somebody would come in with cancer and we'd go through the Enneagram. And the Enneagram would then give them and me an insight into how they geared mentally, emotionally, and physically, how they think, feel, and act. The depth of the Enneagram goes quite deep, but what was really fascinating that came out is that there were There's one type called 2, which is called the considerate helper. And the considerate helper is that person who serves other people before they serve themselves. So they are the givers, the nurses, the doctors, the carers, the typical mom. And when I did the Enneagram, I had 34 breast cancer patients. Every single one of those was an Enneagram 2. So what is fascinating is that, and it's in all the ancient societies, that where energy gets blocked, disease can manifest in the physical. So that talk is really around a lot of how those are all connected, some science behind it, and also some mystery that we don't really understand. But there are links and there are directions around hinting towards how deeply these are all connected. So what I'm going to take you through this evening is essentially healing and health. I'm going to take you through 3 case studies. I'm going to introduce you to a lot of thought leaders, especially in the cancer space, who are really starting to shift the game around the perception of cancer and what cancer means now. I've got a friend of mine, Con Burtish, who he has an app called the Cancer Dojo. And he essentially he was also terminal, and he had brain cancer. And he's a creative director. So he used creativity to be able to tap into psychoneuroimmunology and be able to basically shift his biology. And his lead into a talk is always, there's no greater time in history to get cancer, which is a really bizarre thing to say, but it's very true because we know so much more. And depending on who you're speaking to, between 45%, 75%, and 95%, again, that's who you speak to, is caused by environmental toxins, the way that we deal with stress, not stress itself, but the way that we perceive and deal and process stress, nutritional deficiencies, and lifestyle choices. So those 4 things essentially are now becoming stronger cases around where disease is caused. The science and the evidence, I'll take you through 3 very interesting trials, and also, these are the ones that are quite easily searchable, so you'll be able to take a look at them if they're a bit of a stretch for you. I've got a takeaway right at the end, which I'll be able to email you if you're interested, and a lot of other programs, people to watch, YouTube or TED Talks to take a look at, which speak to exactly what I'm speaking to today. And then introduce you to the Radical Remission, which is essentially... Radical Remission is a book by Kelly Turner that literally brought what all of these authorities in the mental, emotional, and spiritual side of healing have been speaking about, and put it into a nice, neat 9-pillar formula with examples, with case studies of 1,500 terminal cancer patients who are healthy today. And they provide evidence and also the tools in order to be able to actually start integrating this sort of information into your lifestyle, which is accessible. So I'm going to start off with myself. So this is essentially what my life looked like for 5 years after I studied. On the top left-hand side, that's Indonesia. Below that is Key West, Florida. On the bottom left, I thought I was a bit of a rock star, having a pool party. The middle one is Aspen, Colorado, and on the right is Hawaii, which is the first time I surfed really big waves. And as you can see, there's one ingredient that goes across everything, because my whole life was representative of what these slides look like, and it was essentially the sun. So I was misdiagnosed 3 times with what ultimately ended up being squamous carcinoma on my lip. I had the first surgery that I had was a plastic surgeon that took 1/3 of my lip away, so essentially taking the cancer off at the root. And then what was misdiagnosed a 4th time was a lymph node, which was thought to be in trauma after the anesthetic, that ended up being the cancer had spread into my lymphatic system, into my neck. So the hardest decision I've ever made was to actually was a choice between 2 different surgeries, and the most invasive one was a bilateral neck dissection, which I eventually decided on doing. And that's essentially where they cut you from ear to ear, across the neck, and then down to the top part of the nipples, and literally take everything out from your lymphatic system, thyroid gland, muscles, tissues, tendons, I struggle with sit-ups at the moment because I can't keep my head up. It looks quite funny. And then the last part was radiation. So I had radiation on the right-hand side of my face, a little bit on the left as well. And two things happened which were interesting after that. The one which has become a little bit of a superpower is I lost my taste for 6 months because of the radiation. And what was really interesting is I was sitting, and I used to love ribs. They were my favorite things. And I was at a Saar Grill, and it's my favorite place to get ribs and beer. And I couldn't taste a thing. And it seemed absolutely ridiculous that there was no point to eating without taste. And it was such a shift in headspace. And eventually I lost weight and lost weight and lost weight until my girlfriend actually said to me, you actually need to get your head into the game around nutrition. So that gave me an incentive to actually eat for nutritional value and with nothing to do with taste. And I was eating very peculiar things together because I couldn't taste them. So I've since been able to do that. I not only eat for taste, I eat also for nutrition now as well, which is a big win. I also lost my beard, and seeing that I've gone bald and it's like a trendy tag, it's quite unfortunate that I can knock my hair on my face now as well. So the gifts that I got was around belief, and I had 4 amazing doctors: Dr. Andrew Bruce-Schwartz, Sean Brennan, Professor Johan Fagan, and Dagmar Whittaker. They were absolutely incredible. Dr. ABC, that was his nickname. I ended up going to him because you cycle, after you have cancer, every 2 months you go to the different doctors that have basically worked with you. And they check you from different aspects, and basically you clear for 2 months, and then you go to the next one. It's a bit of an anxious thing, those of you who have had cancer before. And on 3 years, I went to Dr. ABC, and I didn't know what to take him, because this is a man that has essentially saved my life. And I thought to take him flowers. And I took him flowers and a card saying, thank you very much for saving me. And it was one of those kind of really special and vulnerable moments between the two of us. And we both dropped our guards, and he said to me, we told you, his exact words were, we told you you had a Chihuahua, where you had the most aggressive Rottweiler we've ever come across. And I said to him, what do you mean? So he said to me, we told you had a Chihuahua, where you had the most aggressive Rottweiler we've ever seen. So when I asked him about this, because Dr. Sean Brennan, and typical most people end up asking the oncologists, what are my percentages, what are my chances? And he said, you got a 95% chance of making it. So I was like, cool, I got this. Turns out I didn't. And it got me into a real state of anger. I was really angry that they had not told me what I was up against so that I could equip myself so that I can go through it. And I basically challenged them, and I said, why would you do that to me? And he said, well, in their experience, not in their belief systems, people who tend to have a very strong belief system, and I'm not talking about thinking, I'm talking about blue being the color blue, that sort of a belief. Those are the people who tend to make it. The people who tend not to are the people who don't have that sort of belief system. I went to Dr. Sean Brennan, challenged him because he gave me the 95% prognosis. And basically he used an analogy of 2 brothers, same upbringing, same parents, same diet. One is predisposed to a positive belief, and the other one is predisposed to looking at life through problems and negativity. And he said I remember him saying, he'd put his house and everything he owned on the person who was positive to be the brother to be positive living, and the brother who was negative would pass. Then I went to Professor Fagan, and I ended up meeting a couple of people who were under his practice. And he does this all the time. He's an interesting individual. And his response to me was, somebody had to play God in order for you to believe that you could actually make it. And he's done this with a number of other people, and it's been quite an amazing thing because he's used the same analogy with them as well. And Dagmar Whittaker is my dermatologist. She's an amazing woman, very straight-laced. She speaks the truth very quickly. And I said to her, how do I avoid ever having cancer again? Because there's such a fear-based thing going for a medical check, and it just haunts you when something is a little bit wrong here, that immediately your mind goes there. And she said, watch what you put in here, here, and here, and you'll be fine. And do you remember Rob Lowe, the rugby player, the South African, not the actor? So he had melanoma, and he had it very late stage. And because he had all the support and he was quite famous, all his rugby mates sent him to the States for alternative treatment. He ate so much turmeric, he actually turned orange, literally. And I said to Dagmar, I said, what in your opinion was the thing that was the tipping point for him? And she said, he is the most stubborn person you've ever come across, Brett. And he was just, he's got such an exuberance for life and living and joy and playfulness that like he wouldn't even entertain, his personality type would not even entertain the fact that he wasn't going to make it. And that was her belief around what actually pushed him through. Even after seeing all four of these and having these conversations, I still thought it quite poo-poo and quite esoteric, and I didn't quite buy what they were selling. But over time, I started researching psychoneuroimmunology, which is essentially where your mental state of intent and your emotional state of feeling intersect to create epigenetics, which is essentially stimulating your DNA to close certain genes and open other genes. And that, simply put, is essentially going, when you get into a state of joy, your pituitary gland secretes oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine, and serotonin. When you're in that, those chemicals are present, basically your autonomic nervous system moves from the sympathetic, which is fight or freeze, into rest, digest, and heal. And that's as simple as it really, those sciences are. And they interrelate with one another. And the placebo effect, there's a couple of really, really fascinating trials, which I'll go through. So what I essentially started to do when I started to understand all of this is, on the top left, like Mark said, I'm a facilitator for Secret Sunrise, which is an hour-long music thing. We dress in try-outs, we do foolish stuff, we make you do foolish stuff. It's quite entertaining for us and for the people who do it. There's a very deep spiritual and consciousness element to it, but I let go of a lot of stress when I do it. There's biodanza, there's movement medicine, there's so many different ways. I like the Secret Sunrise, it works for me. Surfing is a bit of a muse, it brings me into the present. I let go of things mentally. My father said to me that I'd never be able to run comrades because I had bad knees. So I ran 3, and that was the third. It's me finishing my first Ironman. On the bottom, that's the first business that I had finally, after cancer, had the courage to actually give it a go. And then on the bottom left, that's me walking through Nepal in I suppose, a midlife crisis, walking with a group of amazing young women who were starting off their lives in Korea, and gave me new eyes to look at things differently as I was reinventing myself. And all of these things have huge amounts of science that supports them in being able to move in healing, which we'll get into. The next person, and this is my Uncle John. So John had prostate cancer 21 years ago. He's lost his wife to stomach cancer. He nearly lost my mom to breast cancer. He nearly lost me to skin cancer. And in August last year, he got diagnosed with prostate cancer, very, very late stage. Your chances... Prostate cancer is one of those that you don't really want because it's slow growing. It can be there for about 8, his was about between 8 and 12 years. And when it shows, it's basically got a very good grip hold in your immune system. And so your chances are about 5%. And this is what I got from Google and we got from the doctor. This is not me. I don't really buy into prognoses. This is for the effect of how powerful the story is. So I was sitting with the doctor, with John, and basically he got the news that it was at this point, and he had a 5% chance. So basically he took literally, he's got the most powerful mind I've ever come across. He's been my mentor around the mental strength that he has. And basically after about an hour, he just was like, okay, so let's get all the family together. We'll connect. We'll say all the goodbyes. And then he looked at me and he said, but what if what you're saying, Brett, and what you've been talking about is actually true? Why don't we just give it a crack? So I said, okay, fantastic. Then they opened him up to do an operation called a Whipple, which is essentially taking half your organs from here to here out. It's very invasive. It's very tough. And even with the Whipple, you have a 5% chance. When they opened him up, they found metastases on his liver. So they took a biopsy, closed him up, and again, in a conversation with the doctor, which I was in the room, they said, "I'm sorry, John, but you've now got a 1% chance of making it." John took another hour, and he said to me, "Okay, Brett, what do I do? How do I use my mind in order to be able to kind of move forward? Do I let go? So we went on this journey, myself and him and his partner. I gave him this audio file, which is the radical remission, which I'll speak into. And then he also got this meditation, which was around army, kind of going around his immune system and healing himself. John, as of March, is clear of cancer. His doctor says that he's the luckiest person that he's come across. If you speak to John, he attributes it to the way that he lives his life, the joy that he puts into it, and the commitment that he had around his mindset. Again, I'm not speaking to you about what has happened. I'm speaking to you about what his perception is and also what happened through my experience. The next person is Jules Stone. Jules, I've been working with for 3 years. She came to us at Hummingbird Cancer Center. She had ovarian cancer stage 4, and essentially she got told by 2 doctors she was terminal, and that she had 5 to 7 months to tie up her life and do what she needed to do in order to be able to pass on. Jules is an amazing human being, very soft, very kind, and she is very spiritual, a deep faith in Christianity. And she woke up the one morning with this absolute clarity that she had a conversation with God, and that out of this, basically, she was being asked by this entity, the spiritual entity in hers, God, why did she not have that faith? So when she woke up and she came to me and she said to me, "Brett, I need you to help me convince my mind to build more faith. So everything that you're proclaiming can support my immune system, let's do." She dove in and she did absolutely everything that I'm going to speak into. And Jules has been clear for 2.5 years now. And again, these 3 case studies that I've shown you have all been terminal. All of the information that's coming up in the next slides is based on 1,500 people who have essentially been told that they are terminal against solid science in Western medicine and statistics, which are in PubMed. That's where essentially the doctors get the prognosis rates from, which is almost like a Wikipedia repository of medically curated documents and studies. But let me introduce you to the thought leaders first. So these are the people who have kind of led the charge over the last 6 years. So what I'm speaking to you around is not just based on those 3 case studies. These are truths that are being spoken to very loudly out there, but haven't been integrated into society and definitely not in medicine up until this point. So the truth about cancer was developed by a gentleman named Ty Bollinger. Very powerful. He's got a 9-part documentary series. He's got a healing program. He's got a book. What I find challenging about Ty is he demonizes the pharmaceuticals. They've got a lot to answer for, massive amount to answer for. The food industries, but there's a lot of angst and a lot of anger in his approach, although his pillars are very, very powerful, and he has 9 pillars. Then you've got Chris Carr. Now, Chris Carr is she's still got cancer after 14 years. She's healthier than she's ever been. She got diagnosed with this cancer 14 years ago, and she was a videographer in New York. So she actually videoed her entire experience, all the practitioners she went to speak to, all of the processes she went through. And it wasn't just the Facebook friendly stuff, the stuff about "I'm feeling great today." It was the dark days. It was the days when you can't get off the floor. Like Elizabeth Gilbert on the Eat, Pray, Love when she's on the bathroom floor. So she videoed all of those, and she basically journaled throughout that whole process, everything that she went through, which is very, very powerful, because that's the true cancer experience, in my opinion. And she speaks to a lot of, and has applied a lot of these principles to herself, and also has 9 pillars. Then Chris beat cancer. A gentleman named Chris Walk, about 12 years ago, he had colon cancer, also terminal. And his main tool was diet. But again, he's got a program called Square One, and Square One, he's got 9 pillars. Then you've got Lisa Rankin, Mind Over Medicine. She's a medical doctor, and she basically got into a real chronic burnout in her life. She achieved everything she thought would satisfy her, and eventually got to a point where she realized that she had lost meaning in succeeding as a medical doctor and succeeding having the big house and everything like that, and went into quite chronic burnout, and then started to discover these different ways and the different sciences behind healing, and started to applying those. She's also got 9 pillars. Then you've got Anti-Cancer Living with Lorenzo and Alison. These are the scientists, and these are essentially the intellects of the group. Very high reputation. I believe they're both in the University of Texas and have over 100 papers published in medical journals. And their Anti-Cancer Living has essentially got 6 pillars. Then you've got Colin Campbell, who produced probably the most comprehensive nutritional study that's ever been done on the planet, which is over 20 years, called the China Study. So they tracked as nutrition changed and as Western influences, not only food, but Western influences came into China, how diseases started becoming prominent in different pockets where there was very different diets in the different parts of China, and correlated very closely to the growth of obviously the cancers and autoimmune diseases that are coming up. And then you've got Penny and Keith Block, who have pretty much the oldest integrative medical practice in the world, been going for about 38 years now. And their big go-tos are nutrition, visualization, sleep, and an integrative approach from the medical side of things. What all of them have ultimately in common is that radical remission takes everything that they speak to and it puts it into a very nice and neat nine-pillar program and book. So Kelly Turner was, similar to me, a coach and a counselor for people specifically going through cancer, and she discovered a spontaneous remission case in PubMed. And PubMed, as I said earlier, is validated science that goes in there. Nothing unproven can go into the PubMed repository. So she not only found one, she found 1,500 cases of spontaneous remission that were tracked by Western medicine, but could not be explained on how these people actually passed the terminal diagnosis and are healthier than most people on the planet. What she went and did is she got fundraising to go and study them, and she went and interviewed not only the people who had these spontaneous remissions, but their partners, their carers, as well as their practitioners, and interviewed them on how and what they did in order to heal themselves. The book Radical Remission, which I think is one of the most amazing books because it takes basically everything that I've read from Deepak Chopra to Dr. David Hine to Chris Carr to Chris Walk, and it puts it into a very nice, neat pack. So basically what she does in the book, she explains each one of the 9 pillars. She gives the evidence that she's collected from other sources and other case studies, and then she gives tools on how these people have done it themselves. It's extremely, extremely powerful. If you want true help, I think this is probably the most important book that I've come across. And the practical tools make it very, very powerful. So I'll go through it very quickly, but I'll go into a little bit more detail after the science. So a radical change in diet, taking control of health, following your intuition, using herbs and supplements, releasing suppressed emotions, increasing positive emotions, embracing social change, deepening spirituality, a strong reason to live. And I've ad-libbed on the last one. From a coaching perspective, I find when people come up against these are challenging to integrate. And when people usually come up against them, it's usually very challenging to go, I have to change this in order to heal, in order to become better. So using creativity, like with my friend Convertish, who has Cancer Dojo, is a more playful, more accessible way of actually shifting or applying any sort of changes in your life, and to do it through the lens of creative expression is an easier in than what you have to do in order to change. So I've thrown creativity in the back end. I've got 3 interesting case studies. Probably the most well-known antidepressant study that's ever been done is Erwin Kirch and Guy Saperstein, who basically contacted all of the major pharmaceuticals and basically the top 4 antidepressants in the world, the most successful ones, and asked them for their clinical trials, because everything has to be set up against placebo effects so that they can see the validity of the actual drug itself. So what was interesting and probably not surprising is that it took them 2 years in a court order to get these clinical trials released from the pharmaceutical companies. And the reason why is that they did a replication of 2 different essential studies, group studies, 2,318 patients across 19 clinical trials, and 5,000 patients with 35 clinical trials. So essentially, when you go through a clinical trial, and I've done this because I needed money in London, you've got 8 people, 6 people on the trial are on the actual drug, and 2 people on the placebo. You get given the same food, you get in the same environment, everything is managed, everything is controlled. And placebo used to be a single blind, which means the person receiving the drug doesn't know if they're on or off. It then went to a double blind. So the doctors and the nurses who are giving you the drugs, don't know if they're giving you the placebo or the real drug. Now, because of the power of the placebo effect, it's a triple blind is the standard. And they've got to go through 5 series of this. And triple blind means the people analyzing the data don't know which is the placebo and the drug. Can you imagine how powerful the placebo effect is? You've got to go to triple blind from a single blind as a standard. What they unearthed was that 81% of the time, there was absolutely no difference between the drug and the placebo effect. And what I mean by that is that, let's say that at 50 points of happiness or 50 points of contentment, you're a little bit sad. So 60% is normal. Anything above that, you're very happy. Let's just create that. So let's say these people who are depressed are at 50%, which is under the happiness, which is 60. So the placebo worked as well. So in the drug, they went to 100 points, but the placebo effect was at 100, a little bit above 100 or a little bit below 100. The remaining percentage essentially was a 10% variance. So by what, I'm not explaining this too well, so let me try again. So 50% is essentially a little bit unhappy. 60 is kind of middle ground, and 100% is very happy, or 100 points is very happy. So the 10% variance they're talking about there is that there was a movement in 45 points up from the placebo effect, from the placebo. The drug, 50. So there was huge improvement, but there was a marginal difference between the two. And there's always seems to be a 5%, just like with cancer, like the BRCA gene, there is a 5% on chronic depression that your body doesn't actually produce the hormones in order to be able to function in a happy state. But what was phenomenal about the study was they didn't stop there. They went in to understand how this works biologically. So essentially what they did was they looked into the blood and they started to see where the antidepressants went in. It's essentially it fired in the brain in the right areas in order for that level of contentment to go from 50 to 100. What happened in the placebo effect was the body manufactured the mixture of oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, and serotonin in order for that shift to happen in the same areas in the brain fired. So exactly the same thing happened in the brain. It was just that the body created the chemicals for it. That's essentially how the placebo effect works. The next is, and this is fascinating, this is from Harvard. This is nothing poo-poo. You can search it. You can actually download the PDF. I've got the link on the takeaways, so if you want to take a look at these studies, you're very welcome to. Mindset Matters, Exercise and the Placebo Effect. So this is Alia Crum and Ellen Langer did a trial around the placebo effect in exercise, as it says. So it was 48 chambermaids, so people who cleaned the hotel rooms across 2 hotels. The caveat for selection for the 48 people was that they didn't realize that in their efforts in cleaning all the rooms, they were actually doing more than what the American Surgeon General says is 30 minutes of exercise per day. They had no idea that they were doing that exercise plus more. So that was the important part. They then split them into two. The first group, they told that actually what you're doing is way more than what we suggest that you do to actually have a healthy, balanced immune system and the 30 minutes of exercise. The second group, they kept ignorant, so they didn't educate them on that. I mean, this is incredible. So the 30 days later, the group one, all of them on average lost an average of 2 pounds. The second group lost nothing. And this is just the mind telling the body that this is what's happening, and the body responds to it. So there were essentially 3 parts identified in what needs to be present in order for a placebo effect to be effective. One is the conditioned mind. So there needs to be the prompt on, if you do this, this will happen. The expectation comes from the prompt. Based on the future, you're expecting a specific result. And then lastly, the meaning of doing exercise is healthy, it is good for me, it aligns with my belief system that it's a positive thing. And then suddenly those 3 ingredients cause that shift to happen and cause the placebo effect to be activated. This is usually quite a heavy topic, and so I put a picture of a penis in here. And I actually did a talk in East London, and it was between a 70 and 80-year-old audience, and they thought this was the best thing since sliced bread. I couldn't actually quieten them down afterwards, but I'll get to it because it is a beautiful, actually heartwarming story, and quite powerful. So Martin Seligman is one of the leaders in positive psychology. Now, psychology is being challenged by people who are bipolar or very depressed. A psychologist is essentially trained to get them to normal. What then happens when we're bipolar or depressed and we want to get to exceptionally happy? That's where positive psychology comes in. How do we get from okay to very happy? Like I'm not too sure if you know Bhutan. So Bhutan, they have a happiness index. So instead of an economic measurement, their census is around how happy are the people who live in the country of Bhutan. And every single one of their economic decisions that they make is essentially has this as the underpinning foundation. So positive psychology is essentially how do we get happy? So one of the trials that they did was they did people who were going through chemo, basically to split them into 2 groups, the people doing chemo, and typically when you get chemo, you're in a lazy boy, you're in an environment that's quite calm, but there's no stimulus really around. The second group were given chemo, and there was a big screen playing comedy. And so it was a joyful place. What happened when they studied the blood was higher natural cancer killer cells. Now, the cancer killer cells are the ones that when they can identify cancer, because cancer is a bit of a sneaky one. Your immune system typically doesn't recognize it. The natural killer cells are the ones that identify it and then start activating your immune system. They were much higher. The immune system recovery, after nearly 4 hours after having chemotherapy, the body was nearly back to where it was, because as I'm sure you know, chemotherapy kind of, it hits everything, the good and the bad. And increased cell production. Typically, when you're going through cancer, you want cell production and replication to happen in your healthier cells more than it's happening in the cancer cells. That means your immune system is moving in the right direction. And then lastly, a more active immune system is essentially, when they looked through the blood, it was like giving the immune system a triple espresso, and it just basically just came alive. And this is from watching a comedy while being given intravenous chemo. The funny part is Russell Howard is a British comedian. He's very edgy, as you can see with the penis thing, and they've intentionally done it in this area because this part of the conversation gets a bit heavy, is that he got contacted by a young man asking him from the, I think it's the Dream Foundation or Wish Foundation. He was given 3 wishes. The one was to meet Simon Cowell, which is a bizarre thing to ask to me because he seems quite a sharp fella. To drive a Ferrari, which he did. And then the third one was to meet Russell Howard. So anyway, he ended up meeting Russell Howard, and Russell Howard was very quiet and calm and everything like that. And this youngster said to him, I've got to ask of you. And he said, okay. he said, I'd like you to come to my funeral. So, it got quite somber, and he said, don't be funny. This kid had a really wicked sense of humor. So he says, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fancy dress. And he had quite a dark sense of humor. He actually had this whole thing planned that even his dad was dressed as the Grim Reaper. And if somebody coughed, he had to point his laser at them. And this clip, which is easily searchable on Facebook and on YouTube, Russell Howard speaks around in a very funny way on how he's going to... I nearly dropped the most important point. He said, well, what do you want me to dress as? So Russell Howard has got this skit where he chases after people in a big penis outfit. And anyway, this kid says to him, I think you know what I want you to dress up as. So he said, okay, no, fine. And the rest of the clip is around how does he navigate so that he doesn't get in close to schools or anything like that. And if he gets pulled over by the cops and the cops say to him, where are you headed? And he says, I'm going to a funeral. And he's dressed as a giant penis. It's a beautiful and endearing clip. Anyway, 2 months after this youngster got the all clear. I've since learned in other areas he followed a very integrative approach. He was on a lot of alternative plus traditional medicine. He really chose a really good suit, and he got clear of a terminal cancer, which he should have died from. Anyway, what was a beautiful kicker is that Russell Howard, when he was doing his DVD, as it calls it, when he was being recorded for whatever product he was releasing, he said, I'd love you to come on stage at the end and we'll tell the story and it'll be funny and it'll be endearing. And he said, oh, no, that'll be absolutely amazing. So he said, what should I wear? So I said, I think you know what I'll be wearing. Anyway, that's a picture of it. Okay, so I'm just going to go through quite quickly the pillars. So radical remission goes into detail. As I said, I can't recommend it with more grandeur. It is absolutely phenomenal book. It really explains in very easy, digestible ways, very accessible with all the tools in it and the science behind it. So radical change in diet, essentially what I've curated over the last 12 years is I've looked at every single authority that I respect and basically pulled in the important bits, and it's correlated exactly with what radical remission is. And there's very generic things. It's increasing your grains, increasing your fruit, your veg, becoming a lot more plant-based, avoiding obviously processed foods, the sugar in processed foods. Dairy has got a protein called casein, which feeds cancer. So it's reducing that. It's not necessarily eradicating it. Reducing gluten's becoming quite an interesting thing around leaky gut. And those are essentially the sacred things around it. Locally, Marianne Shearer, who's got a restaurant in Willie Point, she's an amazing human being. She gave me some incredible information. And she's actually a global authority on in this space, and very powerful in the way that she supports people in going through a journey and shifting their diet. And again, over time. The next is taking control. So this is a deep willingness to change. So this is a challenge for the empaths and for the people who are more agreeable, and to be able to go, because there's a lot of pressure when you get diagnosed. Your friends and your family are projecting a lot onto your doctor's telling you what you should and shouldn't do. And it's essentially this is going, okay, so I'm going to follow this diet, or I'm going to follow this treatment from a Western medicine, or I'm going to follow this from an Eastern medicine. It's actually committing to that. And there's some amazing science and positive psychology and how that shifts your immune system and basically what happens on the inside of your biology when that commitment happens. So the biggest advice that Kelly Turner actually uses is be as annoying as possible when it comes to your medical practitioners. They are not the gods. You are the god of your body, not them. They are your guides. The next is intuition. This was one of those that every single 1,500 of the radical remission survivors that she interviewed said that it was a prominent pillar, the most prominent pillar. In the overstimulated world that we've got, we've obviously, our attention is being pulled from every single direction. And there's a lot of people have spoken of that we've lost the understanding or the connection that we have with the little voice inside that tells us what decisions are right for us and wrong for us. I mean, our gut has neural pathways and neural cells that are more than what a cat has in its brain. So we have literally a third brain in our stomachs. And a lot of the people who I've spoken to and learned from have used the analogy of when you have to make a decision, just listen to your body. It doesn't matter where in your body, your gut will usually tell you in your gut, but your body will, you'll feel in your body where it is. Anyway, so intuition being incredibly, incredibly powerful, and meditation being one of the most powerful tools in order to sharpen that. The next is very subjective. So now my nutritional makeup is a lot worse than my parents because there's 40% less nutritional density in our food at the moment. There's 40% less nutritional density in our food. And essentially, all the research and everything that's coming around the gut and the importance of our microbiome is critically important. And it's said to be 90% of our immune system actually lives in our gut. When you look at the older societies, like in Europe with sauerkraut, or the East with kimchi and kombucha, ancient society has been using fermented foods in order to be able to manage the microbiome of your stomach. For years, we've just lost this art, we've lost this understanding of where the value of that is. But it can be very challenging, this one especially. I would recommend getting a very good practitioner that you trust intuitively around and getting solid advice, whatever your approach might be. Because around detox and also supplementation, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. Okay, so the next one, releasing suppressed emotions. This is again what I've spoke to around the manifestation of disease in specific areas. All the ancient societies have got it with energy. We call it energy in Western society. It's called prana in the East, and chi. So blockages with disease, where they basically come from. And there's huge amount of science coming out behind this as well. So what is challenging around this pillar is essentially emotional honesty about where you are. I had a friend of mine who was going through a real tough time, and I was living with her at the time, and she had this very amazing, incredible practice around letting go of some painful trauma that she had been building up over years and years and years. In the morning, she'd get into running gear, she'd sit down on a yoga mat, and she'd listen to the song Hallelujah. It was a song that got her into her heart and that got her connected to herself. It was very emotional for her. She listened to the song, and the tears just ended up coming. She didn't know if they were from this or this breakup or this or what she was going through. The tears just came through. Then what she did was, what was interesting is that she did that for about 15 minutes, and then she got up and she went for a run, which is very powerful, because what she intuitively did there is she shifted her biology, and she used exercise to start flooding her system with oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, and serotonin. So she started to give herself that space to be able to feel, and then she moved on. And typically us Boichis and South African men don't give ourselves permission to feel, let alone most people in society at the moment. And this is essentially what that is about. The biggest advice, or when in all of the lectures that Kelly Turner has spoken to, her advice is laugh, swear, and cry hard, which I think is quite powerful and quite beautiful advice. The next thing is increasing positive emotions. In my first coaching session with somebody, I usually say, okay, well, cool. So what are you going to do for 5 minutes every single day that's going to bring joy into your life? And I get this real weird look in their face, and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm going through cancer right now. This is medically proven to be a massive shift in getting you from your sympathetic into your parasympathetic state, where your body actually starts to heal. The science behind this is fairly irrefutable, and I've heard of so many stories about watching comedies or connecting with loved ones or spending time with children, with animals, are incredibly powerful at this. And being able to basically shift your immune system into a state where you actually start to digest, and you start to heal, and you start to process, and you start to let go, and your mood shifts. but your biology is doing exactly the same thing. Extremely, extremely powerful. Embracing social change. This one is incredibly surprising. So there are these blue zones all over the world, and it's typically small communities where there are people who live older than 100 years old, and there's more people who live older than 100 years old per capita in these areas. One is Sicily, when there's, and I cannot pronounce this, centenarians. So people who live longer than 100 years old. And they drink a lot of booze. They sit around a lot. They've got a good diet, Mediterranean, which is kind of a bit of an ideal. But they don't essentially do all the practices that we've spoken to before. So what have they got? They've got a sense of community that is very deeply connected, that connects them very, very, very deeply. So they've got this ecosystem of human beings that support one another and are there backing one another. The science behind this is quite powerful. In PubMed, there's a huge amount of science around this. And essentially the conclusion is that if two people are going through cancer and one has got a very deep supportive, one or two connections, not necessarily an entire community, but one or two very powerful connections, love connections, and the other person doesn't, the person who has those connections will live 50% longer. And that's been proven again and again and again. Deepening your spiritual connection. And when I speak to spirituality, this is, again, very subjective. And I'm very cautious when I speak into this because everyone has very different beliefs. My analogy for this and what I was given from somebody else was that when you're standing, let's say you're in the Namibian desert at night and it's a beautiful warm evening and you look at the stars and you watch shooting stars, that feeling that's inside of you, that's what it's being spoken to here. It's your connection with yourself. It's your connection with meaning to why you're here or what purpose you have, essentially. And the advice is losing your mind. So things like meditation, letting go of your head. I've done the MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress releasing mindfulness course, and it's phenomenal. It's 8 weeks. And it just really, there's been huge science around that specific course, showing people actually shifting from very chronic cancer prognoses with the mindfulness course, obviously with everything else, but the mindfulness course being a very strong base in that. And essentially, whatever your version of spirituality is around that. Then probably the most data, because the opposite of depression is a strong reason to live. And this is essentially where bucket lists come in, where a future prospect. I worked with an amazing woman who was given 6 months, and she was very, very late stage. And she wanted to meet her granddaughter. And this was something that literally you could see in her energy, you could see in her mind, you could see in her eyes. This was her entire purpose for the rest of her life. She ended up making 3 years. She ended up writing a book for her granddaughter. She ended up doing a lot of amazing things and writing a birthday card for every single one of her birthdays up to 21. And if you speak to her husband, this is the reason why she made 3 years. And gratitude is becoming an absolute powerhouse of how our immune system can shift the quickest. And it's not thinking it, it's feeling it. So essentially, when I'm working with a client, if I take I don't want to hit the speaker. If you take your hand and you put it onto your heart, essentially what you're biohacking yourself, which is essentially you can actually manipulate oxytocin to come out of your pituitary gland now by putting your hand on your heart. So when you do this, you're actually shifting into a state of joy. So I get people to write 3 things they're grateful for, and then to put their hand in their heart, and then to read them and feel them. Because this is a hack in order to feel it even when you're going through trauma. But gratitude's amazing science coming up behind it. Then the last one, courtesy of my friend Convertish, takes advantage of neuroplasticity and creating a thicker, cleverer, and a heavier brain. So essentially, when you think and you do different things, that your brain is shooting along different paths. And the more that you do that, the more creativity you have, the more you can solve problems. And that's essentially what neuroplasticity is. And an amazing example of this was a lady that I was working with, and she couldn't apply any of these 9 pillars, or the 10 pillars, should I say. and she really struggled with change. She had something, she kept on coming up against the wall. And what she essentially did was that she got out of the bed most mornings on the left-hand side. For a week, she got out of the bed on the right-hand side. Then the next week, something else shifted, a tiny little change. And suddenly, within 3 months, she was completely changing every single part of her life with ease and with joy, as opposed to with obligation and with a must. So creativity, I believe, is essentially a more accessible way of implementing change in your life. And starting with very simple things and playful things can have a huge difference down the line. And then I've got these are the people that have, or the books and the things that have really changed my life. I've got it in a takeaway, and then I can send to you. I've even got links to the videos if you'd like. You can just chat to me afterwards or take my card and give me an email. Dying to Be Me I've led with that. It's Anita Majani, and it's a phenomenal story. It'll stretch belief systems, even the esoterics, I believe, around how the spirituality and spiritual contracts essentially can shift. And what's amazing about her is that Western medicine tracked everything. Literally, she had lemon-sized tumors in her neck and her abdomen, and she was, I think, 36 kgs or something ridiculous. Within 5 weeks, she had reduced after waking up and having this near-death experience, the tumors had reduced by 70%. And a number of weeks after that, she was clear of cancer. It's a phenomenal story. You Are the Placebo. Joe Dispenza, which is the second guy on the right over there, is a phenomenal guy. He's taken over from Bruce Lipton, which was the author of The Biology of Belief. It's absolutely phenomenal what he's doing in his workshops at the moment, because he's tracking the biology as he's getting these shifts in the spiritual space. And in the physical space and in the emotional. He's literally tracking all of those as he goes, and he's releasing that data. His new book is called Becoming Supernatural, and it's quite mind-blowing. The next one is Radical Mission, which is the book I'm speaking to, which is essentially a beautiful collation and curation of the content that I've spoken into. The Heal documentary introduces you to all of those people who basically speak to the same thing that I'm speaking to here, just through a different lens. Could be spirituality, could be the emotional side, it could be the mental game. But amazing documentary, and it's a great summary. Transcendence is on Food Matters TV. It's probably one of the most powerful series I've watched. It's a 6-part docuseries, and it brings in very similar, if not very common, people who basically are up there for the Heal documentary, but incredibly powerful. It just basically takes Heal to the next level. So the people I would recommend to follow is Chris Carr. She's got amazing diets and really fun way of experimentation with foods and with meditations and things like that. And she's very gentle in the way that it's about the small, tiny steps and being consistent. It's not about these massive changes in order to curb something or change something dramatically. Joe Dispenza is phenomenal that he's tracking all of this stuff. He's literally proving the connection of the mind, body, spirit in a way that's never been done before. The practice that literally changed my entire life is meditation. There's no part of my life that it hasn't changed. I couldn't recommend it more, but it's taken me 10 years to anchor the meditation practice, and I'm still playing with guided, unguided, metta, all sorts of different ways. And gratitude journal, again, has also shifted my perspective. I work with a number of people, and obviously in the place that I work with people, it's a very hard environment. Everything is very coated with a lot of fear and negativity. A gratitude diary over a long period of time with consistent work, just 3 things per day. And I mean, there's so many studies and beautiful TED Talks around this. It literally shifts how your brain sees the world. And what is amazing is that if you do a gratitude journal for 3 weeks, you'll be neutral most of the time. If you go into up to about 6 weeks, you'll start looking forward to it. After 3 months, your subconscious mind starts to manipulate you in order to do things so that you can then have things to write the next morning for your gratitude diary. Literally, your subconscious mind starts to serve you and starts to manipulate everything that you do so that you can actually write gratitude things. So literally, you are Jedi mind tricking yourself. I think it's the most powerful. And that's me. And thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening.